Good day. We have an opportunity and pleasure meeting Professor Chris Cieszewski. Good day.
Good day.
Reason of our meeting and discussion is part of the Smolensk crash investigation. Professor Chris Cieszewski is an expert of the wood science, and also he's organizer and a member of this last Smolensk Conference in Warsaw. Before we go there, can you tell me, Professor, what you are doing now? Where is your university?
Well, I work at the University of Georgia, but let me first clarify that I'm not specifically specializing in wood quality or wood sciences. I'm a forest biometrician, and my program is fiber supply assessment, which consists of large area inventory and inventory projections, and that it's kind of a field that it's comprised of computer science, mathematics, and statistics. I work with large databases relating to large area inventories, and analyze them with various other spatial data using satellite imagery and using various mathematical and statistical methods to compile large area inventories, and then use that for large area sustainability analysis or simulations, studying dynamics of the forest utilization and growth, and analyzing various responses to human actions, like, for example, regulatory constraints and management techniques and management approaches and so on. So, of course, wood quality is part of my background and education, but really not the forest itself or biology or physiology is in the core of it, but mostly computer programming, statistical analysis, and mathematical modeling that is used for simulation and analysis of dynamics of large areas inventory. Now, various things are related to it. Of course, wood parameters and quality and so on are inherently very closely related. Also, we collaborate as teams with various members, and a number of my colleagues are specializing in different similar fields. And among others, there are those who do specialize in the wood quality, and specifically in analysis of wood properties and strengths and so on.
Before going further into the Smolensk subject, can you tell me your background? When I was reading, people were commenting you are an American scientist. To my knowledge, you're a Canadian scientist.
Well, I'm a Canadian citizen, and most of my postgraduate education is from Canada. I got a master's degree from the University of British Columbia. I got a Ph.D. on work, not from University of Alberta. I spent 9 years as a regional mensurationist for the federal research in the province, in the prairie provinces. And in essence, if I were to be qualified as a Canadian scientist or American scientist, then I guess if we judge by background, then I'll be Canadian scientist. If we judge by the current occupation, then I'm an American scientist, but I'm clearly a Canadian citizen of Polish descent. So I'm a Polish Canadian who's been working in the United States since 1997 at the University of British Columbia. And in 95-96 in Oregon, I was working for a large private consulting firm who was a contractor to the EPA called Mantec International. As a project scientist there, forest biometrician, what I would describe right now, it's also a forest biometrician. And in Canada, I was a forest mensurationist, which is very close, pretty much the same thing, it's just a different naming for similar fields. I was mostly responsible there for modeling, development of simulation models for stands. My primary target was the Canadian Albertan lodgepole pine growth, second growth, which is a new kind of emerging right now crops. Now, do I represent University of Georgia or not? Well, of course, I represent University of Georgia if I, for example, run over a child on the street. The university will, and I'll be under a alcohol influence, I'll be fired for unethical conduct. If I get a Nobel Prize by mistake or not, University of Georgia will be very proud of it. Even if I, say, rescue a child from a burning house, University of Georgia will be very much vocal about that. The professor from there did save the child. Am I told by the University of Georgia to work on the wood quality of the birch in Smolensk? No, of course not. The last time I heard that the University of Georgia asked to do a certain project, explicitly decided on it, was building a road behind our building. I don't really know any kind of occasions where a professor did something because University of Georgia told him to do it. We have a certain program to work on, research to accomplish, goals to achieve, students to educate. Our mission is to serve, to educate, and to do research. And whatever we do in terms of about the choice of data, choice of research, choice of references, choice of particular projects.
How do you do it? Yes.
It's often it's a process that depends on the opportunities. The opportunities are, for example, funding. If we can get funded, one of our major kind of goals is to get the funds. But also it's sometimes opportunities in terms of collaboration. If we can expand our wings or interests or the work and work with other scientists from other places and particularly other countries, we definitely do what the university wants us to do, and that is judged not by what anybody explicitly might say, but by simply the rules by which we are promoted and given tenure. The promotion and tenure rules at the University of Georgia do require professors to have international reputation, to have some kind of involvement in different things. There is nothing worse for science than inbreeding and sitting in your own field with the same people all the time. So this opportunity of analyzing the wood quality there is very much within the domain related to what I'm doing and related in terms of both methods and people I work with, and in terms of scientific levels and competence, and anybody who is involved with it in this group are people who are doing things that are expected of them, if not explicitly in geographic place and time, in the spirit and in the scope of the knowledge. There is actually nothing I can think of more stimulating than working with difficult problems and having very little data, very little access to the problem, and kind of trying to solve this situation, estimate parameters from a very small sample. I think was a very kind of stimulating and fruitful and good for everybody problem.
Was it only what I'm hearing? It attracted you that a good scientific approach, a problem to be resolved. Was it only the scientific approach, or was it something bigger? Was it political? Was it because of your nationality?
No, not really. I would say not at all, in fact. The coincidence was that I was in Poland in June, and I was asked by Professor Cieszewski, who didn't understand at that point exactly what my work was, but knew that I was related, that my research was related to forestry and to growth dynamics and whatnot. And so he had access to a sample, the actual sample from the birch in Smolensk, that was subject to various investigations and discussions, and different scientists were interested in it, and there was actually apparently a lot of need for knowing these parameters. And he asked me if I could do this kind of study. So he invited me to participate in the conference and give an invited presentation on the wood quality parameters for that birch based on the sample that he could facilitate to get. And my first reaction then was that birch is a birch. There is really not much to achieve from it, but he convinced me that that was, in a way, important to keep it formal and keep it documented and keep it as sort of strict and unbiased and documented study on it as possible, and that there was a lot of interest in it. Well, I took this task on. It appeared to be a quite actually interesting task. There is a couple of, with time it appeared that there is a couple of problems there that we solved in terms of modeling and approach to measurement that in fact might follow with some additional publication just on the methodological side in terms of, say, estimating the nonlinear mean of densities that converges in a branch from overestimated to underestimated due to the presence of compressed wood close to the stem and the juvenile wood away from the stem. That is one. And the second, a certain kind of new method of photosampling that we came up with to estimate the area of knots from a photograph that appears to have quite an interesting merit in the field of sampling, statistical sampling, that is very relevant to measurements of wood quality in the field and potentially might actually result in quite a nice follow-up. It appears that a similar kind of things were already pursued earlier by different scientists in different countries, and in general that might have a side sort of benefits that we never really suspected to be there. Then we followed up with this presentation and further in the collaboration with Professor Witakowski, who was the organizer of the Smolensk Conference.
We are talking about the last Smolensk Conference in Warsaw in September of the last year, right?
Not September, it was October 22nd,
yeah.
October 22nd, 2012. Yeah. And the communication that I'm talking about took place in June 2012.
And you were invited to be one of organizers.
As a follow-up, yes. Originally, I was invited as a person who would do the study and give the presentation and write a report on that. Later in the collaboration, I had some critical comments on the organization. I felt that the whole thing was, that kind of relates to your question too, because you're asking if I have some kind of motivation, patriotic motivation,
correct,
and so. Well, I guess maybe I do. It would be probably more subconscious than conscious. But quite frankly, I feel that in all this study and all the analysis and everything, I'm completely indifferent to nationality. And one of the actual objections that I had, some of the criticism that I had that resulted in inviting me to the organizing committee of that conference was that the organizers of the conference felt that that was something about Polish thing, and I felt it was not a Polish thing, but a scientific thing. They felt it was a Polish science, and I felt it was just science, and I felt it was absolutely international issue or not national issue, because there are interesting scientific problems there. There is nothing actually more exhilarating than not having data and having a problem to solve. If we have data, then it's a simple, really technical matter to draw the conclusions, even if we're just, especially if we're just empiricists, then we're just analyze the data and we have answer. If we don't have data, we have to then be a little more of rationalists. We have
very interesting approach, because so far more or less people involved in that investigation, they are kind of claiming political nationality issues. Professor Cieszewski is having a clear, entirely clear scientific approach. Doesn't really, if I'm hearing right, doesn't really matter if this is happening in Poland or Russia, if that involves Polish nationalities or Russians. You are just saying, okay, we have so limited data, it is my area of expertise, I would like to solve the problem.
Yes, absolutely. It's that was from the beginning. That was my view on it, and some of the things that I told Professor Cieszewski in the beginning was that you've got here mathematicians, physicists, and so on, and they kind of grab different things and work of different things, and this thing is not sort of structured as a general scientific common project, but more as a collection of independent projects. And so I saw it as an umbrella. I saw it that look from the large picture. We look from a satellite, we see a certain pattern, we see a certain things happening, we get closer, we see what we can find out. We find out that we cannot find out much, and that we have different problems. Then we call help, then we call different people. And that actually is a very interesting problem in the reality. As a person who's doing modern land management analysis and so on, I look from the satellite, I find something in the forest, and then try to identify what it is. Maybe it's a hurricane damage, or maybe it is a illegal dumping. And if it's a illegal dumping, then maybe that's a toxic waste. And I have no competence in find out what it is, so I have to then call, say, a chemist or some toxicologist, and then I call help for other people. And if it's, say, structures, then I start seeing a certain type of structures, and it's beyond my competence to completely resolve about what these structures are doing or what happened to them. And so I call, say, civil engineers and so on. And that kind of creates for me an interesting scientific sort of umbrella that, that has the need for everybody from every field, and that's where really the kind of human intelligence and the science is exhilarating. So, so this is kind of what I proposed, and when I started looking at talking about the satellite imagery, and Professor Cieszewski extended his invitation to a second presentation on kind of looking at it from this point of view. At that time then, there was not even a scientific committee section that would talk about the GIS and the remote sensing and the satellite imagery, which I found really quite, at that point, ironic, because to me that was really the main starting point of all the inquiries. Of course, people who were emotionally involved there, well, they looked at it from the point of view of that there was a certain event and they wanted to get to the bottom of it and so on. But I didn't. I looked at it from the point of view of a scientific challenge. I think that, of course, not commenting on the fact that everything associated with it is a terrible tragedy, and it's hard to even talk about it and be not emotional about it. From the scientific point of view, all this emotion should be put aside. I was during conference approached by different people, journalists, some people from the line, and they were asking some questions, like, for example, Professor Cieszewski, do you think that what Russians something? So I cannot think that way. I cannot know what Russians are thinking or what they were intending. All I can do is analyze the data or analyze a problem and look at it from the point of view of what kind of questions I can answer, what kind of questions I cannot answer.
But sorry, going along this scientific approach, how do you then feel by having not access to the data, by seeing that people are blocking that access, not giving you what you're supposed to get as a scientist?
Well, again, this is not something that I feel about. This is a predicament outside of it. Mm-hmm. How do I feel about a boss harassing me? How do I feel about the university not letting me do something? Or how do I feel about a country not wanting or wanting something? That's a separate issue. Of course, I'm a human being and I have my feelings and I have all kinds of different things, but they do not mix with the science. When I'm doing a scientific analysis of some kind of type, then lack of the data becomes the fact of reality. That lack of the data becomes one of the challenges in it. In some way, you're working with a problem that doesn't have a data. Once you accept the fact that there is no data, whether this is because there is a bad guy out there that cuts it off, or maybe this is because there was a disaster and they disappeared, or because this is just a cost of information. You know, in forestry, you work with this kind of situation all the time. You cannot go and measure every tree in the forest. It's just too expensive, it's too impossible to do. And you just accept that as a part of the definition of your problem. You have no data. Well, how do I feel emotionally about it separately? That's a separate issue. It's not like I don't feel anything, but it's not like I feel that this is part of my study.
But you were saying you cannot measure all the trees. I agree, but you expect that after such horrible accident, along the official version that birch was causing that accident, you're supposed to measure the height of that remainings of the birch and the diameter. It wasn't done.
Well, this is, again, this is two separate issues. How I feel about this, it's a one issue. How I deal with it is another issue. And there's actually a third issue. A third issue is something that later came up, actually, kind of surfaced. It's the reception of the results and the criticism and so on. And all I can say about this is that certain things, like, for example, height of the tree, the height of the remaining trunk of the tree, well, that clearly was either not measured or measured by somebody who didn't know how to do the measurements. The same diameter. Everything kind of points out that people who are measuring the diameter, people who are discussing the measurement of diameters, people who wrote reports on those diameters, that they have very little knowledge of measurement of diameters. For example, when there is a bulging from a limb, from a tree, then the diameter, if it's at the height of that bulging, needs to be measured above and below and average out. Nobody measures anywhere in the forest or on the trees a diameter on a limb. You can have a tree with a sort of cancer on it, and bulging of a trunk that, let's say, if you needed a diameter at this height, you would then measure here and take the average. You wouldn't measure on this particular height that doesn't allow you to measure it. Of course, if you have it cut and dissected and so on, then you can come up with the whole taper and find out what it is. Now, when you have a tree that is elliptical, most trees are, then what you do is you measure the diameter in two perpendicular directions and you take the average of that. If you had a elliptical tree with bulging at different heights, then you would take two measurements below, two measurements above, and average them all. So basically, with height, the same thing. I mean, the tree was supposed to be 5 meters, 5.1 meter high in one report. Then apparently was 6.6, then 6.5, then 7.5, and then some other ones. Well, basically, what that means, and again, it's not like I feel about it one way or another. It's just a matter of fact that people who were creating those reports clearly either were neglectful or didn't have the knowledge of how to measure. Well, in that kind of situation, I don't get emotional about it one way or another. I don't really think it's relevant whether I think one way or another about it. What I do is I do my own measurements. So what I did was I took several pictures of the whole tree with a point of reference. I used some information that I got from indirectly from the retired journalist Dr. Gruszyński, who has a picture of himself standing at that cross that is on just about every picture there on the internet next to the tree. The advantage of that cross is that, first of all, it is next to the tree every time. Second, it is right against the tree. So I found out what was the height of Dr. Gruszyński. Then I found out what was the most prominent part of the cross, which was between diagonal. There's a cross like this there, and there's diagonal, and I found from that angle here on the bottom to the top of it, 70 centimeters. And using this as a point of reference, I ran it on several pictures. I got measurements of varying from 6.4, I believe, to 6.7 meters. Well, that's on 4 or 5 pictures. That's pretty much dead on. I get 6.5 meters for that tree. Is good enough for me. It is a far more confident result, in my opinion, than having reports that are varying from 5.1 to 7 or 9 or whatever they could be. The important is that if we have two sources of data, and one source shows a contradicting or self-contradicting large variation, undependable numbers, and in addition are reported without the error, without the methods how they were done. And then you have another source that is tractable, refutable, and everybody can replicate it, and it gives a small variation. Then the second source is better. So in that case, my source for my purpose is better. It's really finding the measurements of the tree wasn't really the main goal of my study at the beginning. What was the main goal of the study was finding density, particularly at the point of the breakage of the wood, assessment of the realistic values of the density, which is different for green wood and different for dry wood. Most tables are for dry wood. Live tree, it's a green wood. This tree that we analyzed that was having leaves in the following vegetation season, so that was clearly a live tree, therefore the wood was green.
Was it sick? Excuse me, we were hearing that this tree was sick. It was not very...
Actually, I have no hard data or reason to believe that the tree was sick. There was, I think that this might have come from a misunderstanding. At what point, once I gave the presentation, I got a lot of emails from different people, and some people were providing me with some additional data, some people were providing with some additional pictures. One of the photographs that I got of the tree was a kind of poor resolution. It was a compressed picture that had young shoots with the seeds on them and a sort of polarized sun reflection. And at the place where I looked at, it looked that there was a white stain that was the sun reflection, and a black sort of snake with the side channels, and that looked like a fungi reservoir. Yes. And I looked around on the picture, and there were a bunch of dead trees there too. I mean, that was really the question came from why there are these dead trees around and so on. I looked at that, and kind of my kind of initial assessment was that there were many dead trees around, and this one had the rhizomorphs, and this white stain looked like a mold. And I concluded, gosh, maybe that tree was actually already infected by the fungus, and it was possibly then weakened by it. And so I wrote that to several people who were copied on this. And then I got the actual full resolution of that picture. I saw clearly that that was not, the white part was not fungus, but it was sun reflection. That was just polarized in that compressed picture. And that what I thought was rhizomorph was a shoot with those seeds. And I quickly wrote to everybody there that please disregard what I was saying before. It's clearly not rhizomorph, and it's not a mold, not a fungus, and I don't think, therefore, I take back what I said in terms of that the tree was infected by fungus.
Sorry, we are talking very scientific language there. Can you tell people conclusions, any conclusions? Was it possible, or can you define, was it possible that that kind of tree, if it would even happen, because the aircraft was talking from another scientific analysis, 50 meters, not 5 meters above the ground, was it even possible that such tree could cut a wing of the aircraft?
Well, I cannot directly speculate on a question of comparing materials, and because that's a more advanced thing. I would trust somebody like Professor Bienienda, who I believe had needed the parameters that I derive in order to write the simulation. What I can say is things that are that I believe are facts, pretty well documented. That the wood of this tree at the breakage place height was substantially weaker than what you would expect from the wood of the standard American wood poles, which were the ones that were used for testing crushing planes, and that were discussed in some other studies. That's one thing. Second thing is that the pattern of breakage and the position of the tree, and this is not from the analysis that I did from the wood quality, but from, maybe let me back up a little. First, the density of the wood would be similar to that standard American wood poles. However, the tree had enormous amount of knots, limbs, and not straight curved grains around that breakage time. That makes it what we calculated approximately 50% weaker than it would be for analogous similar wood of similar density, similar MOE, module of elasticity, if it didn't have it. Now there is a, basically what happened is that if you have a knot, it's kind of like having a hole in the stem, in the trunk, but it's worse than that because the grains that are going around it are not straight anymore. They go around that and build up, and it's actually, and notice here it's a hole, but around that hole you have a number of not straight fibers that are making it weaker. There is a, if there's a knot here, even if that knot were made of some steel, and intuitively might seem like a knot is something that makes the wood harder, because if somebody takes, for example, an axe and wants to chop the wood for...
Common understanding, yes.
Yeah, it's like chop a wood for fire, right? Then they hit that knot, and that knot is like, let's say, could be a core of steel. So that's very misleading. When it comes to breaking, that knot is basically a weak spot. It's you have the knots here. You basically have not only holes in it. You have uneven grain. It makes it much weaker. You hit it in any way here, and it breaks the right way. There is a that particularly it is on this side, because when the bending forces get a little bit this way, then you have a breakage point on the outside where the knots exist. So, for example, my hobby, it's a building. It's a building. So I like building I-beams. The way you build I-beams is that you cut, say, 2 by 2, 2 inches by 2 inches strips of wood, and you take a thin plywood or OSB, and then you put on top, glue on top, and nail those 2 by 2s. And you can create an I-beam of a depth of, let's say, even 20 inches. And has only very little wood on it, and it's relatively light. In fact, that's how you see the bridges. Most of the bridges, they have the I-beams where is a flange on the bottom, flange on the top, and a web in the middle that is very thin, because that in the middle, that strength is not very important, but on the outside it is. Now that flange for a big heavy bridge is going to be very wide and very strong. For a small bridge, it will be very narrow. Now, if you get that big one, wide one, and you make holes in it, then it's going to be just like you had it.
You weakened it.
Yeah, you weakened it. And that basically goes for vertical. It goes the same thing. When you have an impact on this side, then the knots on this side are making it much weaker. So by the virtue of having those knots and not application of chopping wood for fireplace, but for potential breakage in this, that birch was probably 50% strength of a clear wood birch. Now all the tables and all the models for calculating strength and so on, they assume a clear wood. In fact, this is written also in LS Dyna manual that I checked just in case if I wanted to make sure that any kind of comments about that knots and so on would actually be relevant, because who knows, maybe LS Dyna, author of LS Dyna, maybe assumed that you would have a very knotty wood, right? So, so I checked that. Now, with that large amount of branches and knots and green wood, birch in general, it's stronger and harder than pine, than southern pine. But a green birch, it's either weaker or similar to pine. And then you have these knots there, and they make it half of it. There is virtually no contest. So if you had any kind of calculations for that wooden pole, then you could conclude conclusively that the birch could not sustain the same impact at the pole. Now, so that is data. That is the
facts. The facts.
The direct science.
Yeah.
Science. Facts is facts with the understanding that we're talking about a variation, we're talking about real world and so on, and just about everything we see and so on has certain confidence and variability, and there is some always small probability that what we see is not what we think it is. But yes, that's pretty much the hard numbers that come from the science. Now there is a other part of it is experience, seeing breaks in the forest and so on. And that is based partially on very extensive experience of Mike Stroop, who's been a regional biometrician for Weyerhaeuser for 30 years and has enormous experience and have seen enormous number of windbreaks and so on. He feels that this is a typical appearance of a windbreak. I look at it from the point of view of a person who's having engineering background, some forestry experience, have seen some mechanical wood damages, and is also interested in building various wood structures such as beams and constructions and so on. And I find it, if not impossible, then extremely hard to believe that any tree that would sustain an impact of a 300 nearly kilometers per hour could potentially just flip out like that and sit like this here with a couple of big splinters that are there. That's completely intuitively impossible to me. But I'm not an impact engineer. I'm not a like Professor Binienda, person who's studying in-depth material strength. So I would trust somebody like Professor Binienda with his results. I think that though, if you do any simulations of trying to break the wood, you'll find out that the dynamic impact, dynamic damage is such that if there were any splinter going there, that splinter would be broke off from both sides. And it's a typical for any kind of high velocity damage that the outside pattern, when something hits from this side, then leaves a bigger damage on the outside than on inside. So like you can imagine a bullet. It comes in with a small hole, on the outside comes with a big hole. When something cuts in this way there, I can imagine that if it did have collide with it and break, then it would have to rip off the whole part. It would not leave any kind of splinters hanging there. Well, of course, if the wing were made of something extremely weak, I don't know, as compressed styrofoam or something, then you can imagine it could hit that tree and just barely break it and completely disintegrate, and then the tree eventually would kind of fall down. But that's an extremely unlikely scenario that I can imagine could happen with a 74-ton plane and a wing made of both the aluminum sheeting on the outside and the framing inside, and basically that's very unrealistic. But like I say, I would trust Professor Binienda more than myself in terms of the evaluation of that. I think that there is a room for some other physicists. My kind of favorite way, favorite sort of approach that I would like to see someone take would be to follow on the terminal ballistics. It's a branch of physics that deals with high impact damage from, say, bullets and things like that. I think that if the problem were reduced to, say, inequality instead of equality, it would be mathematically easier tractable and probably kind of more convincing in terms of just answering a question, could that have happened, versus a question, how did that happen?
You mentioned Professor Binienda. He did the simulation, 3D simulation, and I think it is much that you are talking about. Going back to the scientists involved in that investigation or verification, you are not a part of the official team of Minister Macierewicz.
No. I have completely no knowledge of this team operating. I don't even know who belongs there in it. I have no interest in being in that team. I don't think I would accept being there even if I were invited, but I was never invited either. I find, if anything, if I'm part of anything whatsoever, that would be the Smolensk Conference, because I was co-organizer of it, and part of what I liked about it and what I contribute to it, I think, it's or at least help kind of uphold it. It's complete independence from any kind of politics. I have no idea what the current political parties are. As I understand, one is described as left, the other one as right. I'm not sure what that means. I found lots of demagogy in political things. I don't vote. I don't have any political interest in any politics of any country in the world, and that includes the United States and Canada and Poland just as much.
This was my next question, because you were accused, I was reading some blogs, that you support or you are a sympathizer of the Rightfulness and Justice PIS party. You are not.
I don't know. I'm sure I'm not supporting them. I don't know whether I would support them if I knew what they are about. The thing is, I don't even have a clue what they're about, and I have no inclination to really find out because I don't live there. I'm not interested in politics. I had a long time ago some political interest that ended up in basically certain level of bitterness or expiry that I I basically have completely in a way resentment to even be a part of any political interests. However, if I were to say judge or think about what I've seen so far, what I could say is that one party that calls itself peace, which the meaning is ironically peace and justice. The first piece I meant PIS, and the second piece is the English word peace and justice. It's meaningless in a sense of the title, because I cannot imagine of any party in the world that would not claim that they want peace and justice. The other party that calls themselves PO, which is Citizen Platform, again is meaningless, because I cannot imagine any party in the world that wouldn't claim that it is a citizens platform. And in terms of names, they're completely undescriptive. I don't know what they mean. They mean much less than, let's say, American parties that could be described as liberal versus Republicans.
You disconnect the names of the intention. You don't trust that any political party could claim itself
to be any different than any of the two. I mean, every party is claiming to be for justice, and I don't know parties that cannot imagine a party that would say we're going to promote injustice, and I cannot.
But one party is on the right more, and
one might be more on the right, one might be more on the left. But again, I don't know what that really means. If we were, say, close to the center, being on the right would be a good thing, and being on the left could be a good thing. If you take care of a social responsibility, then you're presumably on the left. If you take care of the fiscal responsibility, then you're presumably on the right. Well, you should do both, in my opinion. If you were, say, on the extreme left, then if you were anything like what I remember from the Polish communism, then you would be clearly on the wrong. if you were on the right, that would resemble anything like the Third Reich, then you would be clearly on the wrong too. So I have no inclination of really investigating at that. But what I could say is one observation that I have had from my recent dealings in Poland was that from looking at the press and some of the things that are written on the internet and so on, it seemed like a clear pattern is that whatever they claim themselves to be the PO part is more brutal and less civilized than what I had on the other side. They accuse each other of incivilities, they accuse each other of bad dealing and bad doing and whatnot. But if I look at the worst possible examples, there is one author, for example, on I believe onet.pl. There is one author there that I would describe as a uncivilized, compulsive writer without a talent who uses such language as talking about hyenas, and it's such a low level that in some way I feel sort of enriched or privileged to be insulted by him. It is, yes, it is indeed. When you're insulted by somebody who's a really uncivil, really unintelligent, and really untalented, and he uses a very ugly way of doing it, in some way, I suppose, this testifies that you're not part of the same environment that he is. And I don't really have any inclination to judge that PO crowd on their own merit. But I feel that anybody who stays in the same company as that particular author, it's in the wrong company. And if somebody is in the wrong company, I wouldn't want to be in that. So if I were to vote today, if somebody put a gun to my head and said, Chris, vote, I don't care what you vote for, you have to make the vote. My vote would be definitely against PO, against the incivility, against the wild, kind of uncontained escalation of brutality and actions. I met people at the Smolensk Conference who are delightful people, and it's a life experience to have the privilege to know them, like Professor Gieras, like Professor Witakowski. These are people who have no shred of bad blood in them. I think that whatever they are, I don't know what they are actually, but if I were to vote on something and we're trying to just make a good guess on that, I would just call them and ask them, what do I vote for? What are you part of? Well, that's basically the scope of my interest in politics.
What you are saying, it is according to what is my observations, also the brutality of the political fight and language in Poland is unacceptable from time to time, because it has nothing to do with democracy. Democracy, the one party is supposed to accept the opposition, which is not the case in Poland. And the language, what I always say, if that kind of language would eliminate many politicians in our countries, regardless of the sympathy of political. If someone would be saying or behaving like some people do in Poland, they will be out of political life and scene in no time. Yes, going back to your affiliations or lack of affiliation with official commission of Minister Macierewicz, do you agree with their political view, or you have your own observations?
Well, I really cannot comment on their political views, because, like I said, I am totally ignorant about political programs, views, or who represents what. What I am aware of is that Mr. Macierewicz is conducting a investigation and has some kind of team there that does the analysis and whatever, and various investigations and so on. I think that is actually a very noble effort. I think that anybody who tries to get to the bottom of something, it's doing the right thing. Whether he politically has some other things I'm not aware of, if I were to just think about how that in any way connects to me, I would have to admit that at least on one account, well, first of all, I don't know him, but on one account, I must say I didn't like his acting. It was during the Smolensk Conference that was in Warsaw, where he presented his conference under the same name as the second day of the Smolensk Conference. I thought that was not terribly elegant, and that was in some way undermining our apolitical position.
Maybe he didn't know that.
If he did, well, I doubt he didn't know, but maybe he didn't mean anything wrong, or maybe his gains in terms of attendance were greater than the compromise of say, independence in the name. I'm just saying I didn't like it. I didn't like it because I wanted, and I do want, and I cannot imagine changing my position in that, to be independent from any kind of political programs or views. I see that as a scientific challenge. As a scientist, I put the whole heart in it, regardless where it's going to take me, regardless what I will find out. I would like to have a reception of everybody possible, including society, including laymen, even though mostly we're really interested in the scientists, because some of the technical methods and things and so on are highly technical and might be difficult for common laymen.
But this coin has two sides. Of course, scientific side.
Which coin?
The coin of what I'm calling the Smolensk crash. It has two sides, right? We cannot take away the political aspects of that, right?
Well, so we can. I don't see really why we cannot. I don't think we, in fact, I agree with you, we cannot, because to me it doesn't exist there inherently. Inherently, when when Galileo and Copernicus claimed that the system of planet is not geocentric but heliocentric, they did not do any politics. I mean, the church was claiming that they did, and there was some kind of possibility of construing it that way, but to me they didn't. When I'm making a statement, taking a problem to analyze, I don't see myself as necessarily associated with any politics, and for that matter, I find that distracting to be a part of politics.
But this was elite of Polish elite, which died in the terrible crash and under circumstances.
And if they were French, would that be worse?
No, but still it is.
But it would be the same. A French, German, whoever would die there would die. I mean, there is a terrible tragedy happening. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to trivialize it or make it in any way go away what happened in its own rights, in its own kind of domain. But I happen to be in the scientific domain. And if I'm in the scientific domain, it is unaffected by the fact whether the people who died were French or Polish.
Yeah, from scientific point of view, you are absolutely correct.
I mean, this birch,
yeah.
The birch, how does that affect whether it was Polish or French who died? It's either it could break or it could not break. You ask me about my opinion personal as a person who kind of lived in some way in understanding of mechanics of wood and trees and so on. I'd say it's not very likely that it did. But if you ask me about as a scientist about the opinion, I'm going to calculate the numbers. And basically the outcome of my analysis is not whether that happened or not, or whether Russians were right or wrong, or who think what, but it's that the density is 550 kilograms per cubic meter, and that MOE is 14, and that the likely strength proportion in terms of reduction for environmental variables is about 50%. And that 50, that's 550. And I mean that 50%, that 550 kilograms. And that numbers are the only thing that I'm willing to claim as a scientific result of my studies. Everything else, I don't think it should be a part of it.
Going back to the conference, this last Smolensk conference, with your great involvement as a co-organizer and your input, scientific conclusions and inputs. Before I ask that question, how the viewer who is interested in to find more could find materials from the conference? Is it accessible on the web, or can they buy a book? Can they buy a report?
Oh yeah, well there is a yes, there are a number of follow-ups, publications, and so I developed very elaborate web pages, smolenskcrash.com, that I tried to include everything that I thought was relevant. I tried, I say, because I didn't have enough time to do everything, but I did a good effort, and if somebody has some kind of additional information, as long as it's not somebody's personal agenda or any kind of political agenda, I'm willing to publish that on that website. There is a, of course, website, Konferencja Smolenska.pl, that is the official conference website. Then there is a publication of proceedings that could be purchased from Professor Witakowski that contain all the articles from that conference, all the presentations that were presented at the conference. And then there is a special issue of a journal, Mathematical Forestry, Mathematical and Computational Forestry and Natural Resource Sciences, that is dedicated to this conference. Unfortunately, only 4 out of 18 papers made to the journal and made through the peer review of that. I was involved in that, and from the beginning it was advertised that that journal was organizing that special issue, and that the scientists who felt that their papers could withstand an international peer review could submit the papers to it. Well, 4 papers made it. There were 2 of my papers. It's not just my papers, it's our papers. Each of the studies included a number of scientists, including from UGA, including Professor Pete Bettinger, who's very accomplished and very knowledgeable in GIS and forest management, operational research, and so on, studies. There was a Mike Stroop, Roger Lowe, and then there was a Antoni Finto, who's the wood quality specialist, and so on. So these are on mcfns.com. It's an open access journal. Anybody can create an account and ask for and apply for a subscription. The subscription is free, so there is no cost. It's an open action. It's an open access, and I believe that typically that journal is going to be making completely open access something like 3 months after publication, which means you don't even have to identify yourself in terms of registration.
Would it be any hard copy, like the book, like the final report, printed including all the materials and all the reports?
Well, there is this hard copy book from conference proceedings. Mm-hmm. In terms of the journal, that's electronic journal only, and basically you need to print it yourself if you want to have it hard copy on that. Then there's a number of publications that are still in preparation that kind of might be in the follow-up on it, and next conference is in preparation. We'll see how that comes out. There's a conference is expanding to other fields, sociology, law, and medicine, and I guess all depends on the development in those fields.
Talking about the materials from the last conference, when browsing that, I saw you were describing or writing about some satellite photographs, and your commentary or your conclusions contradict that of the official report.
Well, yes, indeed, it's a part of my research in the project of the satellite imagery analysis. It's actually quite stunning. It really, although it's sort of consistent with that Birch measurement things, it's either a matter of negligence or it's a matter of some sort of lack of I don't know, knowledge or handling, methods of handling. But the reports, Mack report and the Miller report, contained some inaccurate information. I mean, a very simple example of it is that both reports in multiple places are showing us the original crash site and the distribution of the plane debris. Satellite imagery or image compiled from the satellite imagery of April 12. And there is a number of differences between the actual real original distribution of them that are better documented or captured closer to the reality, which still is probably not exactly what it was, but it's closer to what it was originally on the April 11th image. It is actually quite stunning that so many government documents of groups of people who are supposed to be the official experts and are supposed to be the credible experts and do the best possible accounting of the truth, that they would actually follow through with showing this kind of inaccurate, untruthful information. The images of April 12 subsequently are quoted or shown as the alleged distribution of the original distribution of the plane debris by Wikipedia, that apparently it's against that official media. That is kind of puzzling. It's not like I have any emotional responses to it, but from the point of view of confidence in reports that contained wrong measurements, contradicting information, inaccurate representation of the scene, and clearly with time, even years later, do not correct their errors. I would say the whole reports and the accuracy of them, and potentially the fitness of those people who were doing them, whether that be in the area of their competence, technical discipline, or integrity, is in question. And this is a simple matter of fact that these images are wrong. This is not my result of my analysis. This is a mere observation. Anybody can go on Google Earth, or can go to Apollo Mapping, or can go to Global Digital and find out what the pictures were and what were the distributions of the different debris.
Including that mysterious walking part of the wing, which was moving.
It was a part of the plane that was the farthest one was moved something like 50 meters. That was apparently noticed already a long time before I noticed that even, which originally I didn't know even about it. But as I understand on different blogs and whatnot, this was already noticed and explained long time before that. So there is not even an excuse that the producers of the report don't know it, because it's not just my article that brings it up as the first thing. I don't even report it as some kind of stunning discovery. I report it just merely as an inaccuracy that is well documented, very refutable, quite easily to check for anybody, even for laymen, for anybody who can use computer. Then they can find out what it is.
But if I can interrupt you, what is stunning for me, that there is such big tragedy, such inaccuracy or negligence, and what? And nothing is happening. This is crazy.
Well, that's again, I don't want to go where you take it. As a scientist, I don't think this way. If anything, let me try to work with you on this.
Okay.
And try to do. Okay, if I were to put this in this kind of sort of emotional frame, I would look at it a different way. I would look at it that it is stunning that a serious institutions, government institutions, that have a formal controllable structure. We're not talking about some freelance contractor. We're not talking about some consultants, elusive consultants who got something, got money, they were worrying about their billable hours, and they just went home and didn't want to fix what they messed up. We're talking about a highly reputable government institutions with the mandate of doing the best job possible and with the possibility of correcting their job if it's wrong. This is stunning that those institutions do not correct it. It is stunning that that the Miller's committee or whoever it is, that as I understand, Dr. Lasek, it's very vocal about various things and the data. It is stunning that a person on this position, with that accountability, with this kind of public exposure, does not correct what he did wrong. That is stunning. Everything else, it's a sort of emotional response. I'm looking at it from the point of view of correcting inaccurate information. If I do something wrong in my article, and an author will show me a clear, sometimes wrong is not easy to define. I might believe it's right, somebody believes it's wrong, we can argue, I stick to my guns, and I'm going to stand my grounds, and I will claim that this is right. But in this case, this is a simple matter of fact. It's undisputable, and there is nothing that anybody, doesn't matter who, even if the kind of assassin himself, if there were one, came and tried to claim it. It's not possible. Even if somebody from the satellite imagery administration will try to change it, they cannot deny that there is an error. I mean, they could change it. They could say, okay, we're wrong, we sold the image from the 12th as the 11 and from the 11 as the 12th. That would be a correction that would satisfy me.
This is like it was in our recordings, another member or member of the team of Minister Macierewicz commission, he said, Dr. Gajewski, he said, there is nothing, what is the part of the manipulation, what I call manipulation in Poland, they say, okay, part of people believe in that, part of people believe in that. There is, you cannot believe different facts. The facts are the facts.
Well, in this case, that is the case. Yeah, in this case, I mean, like you said, there are certain things that are matter. It's like, I work a lot with statistics, and in many cases, you estimate something, and then you estimated the error of it, and that error doesn't mean that this is a mistake of that much. It's a probability of what could have happened if you had it repeated in infinite number of times and so on. So it's basically, there is a possibility that a fact could be disputable. But in this case, it's indisputable. In this case, this fact, it's simply wrong image, proliferated error by other people, and I guess if you really wanted to push it on a sort of emotional path, then the question is indeed, why is it not corrected? Is it because there is a ill will, or is it because they're incompetent, or is it because they're so ignorant in what they're doing that they're just kind of going to the motions?
But we are still going to the bottom line, which is integrity of the people, right?
Absolutely, yes. It boils down in the end that whether I did something because I was incompetent, or whether I did something because I was ignorant, or whether I did something because I didn't realize that there was an error, that my technician swapped some, and so on. In the end, when I find out about it, I'm obliged to correct it. And if I don't correct it, then it's my integrity is in question. My integrity, whether I'm up to the task, or my integrity, whether I'm even honest about it. That I don't want to go into speculation which one is which, but that clearly is wrong.
Professor Cieszewski, as a well-respected scientist and a professor living in the United States of America, I would like to ask you the question. About months ago, it was out of the blue coming the statement from Professor Zbigniew Brzeziński. Why he did it?
I don't know why that's again. I don't think that way. Why he did it? I know what you're talking about. I've seen this. I heard it. Quite frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if it were a prank and it weren't him. I don't know, or maybe he was made to do it, not knowing what he was. I don't know. This is kind of peculiar. I'm afraid to even think about it too much, because I respect Professor Brzeziński very much and used to think that he was, well, I still think that let me put it this way, I do believe that Professor Brzeziński used to say very wise things and very well balanced. And what appears like he's saying there, it's completely out of character with that. I don't know really what happened. I don't know if that was really him. What I know is that Professor Brzeziński is a very intelligent person, and it's extremely unlikely that an intelligent person would be saying things like, for example, it is disgusting to make any kind of questions or allegations about potential assassination and so on. We are in the country of 1001 conspiracy theories about JFK. Obviously, he heard about that. We are in the country where the politicians are fighting so dirty and having all unrestrained vicious attacks on each other, that talking about a handshake at the time of a election is a joke. I mean, it's not even a joke, it's a sad joke. This is really beyond even commenting. Not intelligent person can possibly say that people who are trying to encourage proper investigation. Proper means one that can measure a tree, that can show a proper right date of a satellite imagery when they claim it happened. Proper means one that is actually investigating the accident. Proper means giving respect to those who died. And if somebody died, if somebody from the family died, nobody has right, moral right, to tell them to stop trying to find out what happened. Nobody has the right. So talking the things like that and dressing that in the language of that this is disgusting, so is not just childish and hypocritical coming from this country here, from America, but it's plain unintelligent, or maybe just simply dishonest. That's why I don't believe that was Professor Brzeziński. I think it was some kind of compilation, maybe taken out of context, maybe compiled from talking about different things and so on. Passing a judgment on a large part of society, describing in the language that Professor Brzeziński did, or allegedly did. It's just, I suppose, below what I believe Professor Cieszewski, yes. That one thing that many people don't realize, which I didn't realize until actually quite recently, in terms of the opinion about whether it's good to do some additional studies or not. From the scientific point of view, I'm looking at problems that haven't been solved, that is good enough for me to work on them. From the point of view of the thing, as you seem to like to put it, happen, what's now, things like that. From that point of view, I actually was not aware of the fact that there wasn't really much of an investigation of any sort from the Polish side anyway. And if I look at it from that point of view, then I say that an investigation is way past due. Well, why do I say there wasn't one? On the smolenskcrash.com and on konferencjasmolenska.pl, there is a document compiled by Professor Witakowski, who was the eyewitness of that confrontation or of that situation. That was proofread and confirmed by other professors who were there as well, who were eyewitnesses. That basically documents a statement of Dr. Lasek, who said that they didn't do any investigation because when they got to Smolensk, they found out that the cause of the accident was that the plane came down below 100 meters. So once they found out that, they accepted that as a fact, and they concluded that there was nothing to investigate because they already solved the case. The accident was there due to the fact that the plane went below 100 meters, and therefore they decided that there was nothing more to investigate, and then went home. Maybe they did something there, but pretty much everybody is welcome to read this document. I mean that Professor Witakowski wrote, this is what Dr. Lasek apparently said. This is what he didn't dement it. This is also consistent with some of the things that I saw recently that were saying something that, quoting Dr. Lasek saying something to the extent that the birds didn't cause the accident, it was the fact that they went below 100 meters that caused the accident, and that. Well, here I can't help that layman's reaction to it, that this is a grotesque to me. But to be completely fair, it, in some way, it's not inconsistent with some other reports. I saw in the UK one of the reports where at the heading conclusions, or the reason for the accident, was also quoted that the plane got below a certain height, and that this was this. However, the other one was properly investigated.
This is what I'm saying. It was after normal, careful investigation.
That's right.
These statements were done immediately after the crash, before even investigating the case.
Yes, yeah. Yes, that's right, yeah. So, so that's indeed concerning.
My understanding is Professor would be also co-organizer of the next Smolensk Conference. So
yeah, I'm on the organizing committee of the conference. I was also invited to be on the scientific committee of the conference. I intend fully to be a part of it as far as I can afford my engagement in terms of time and the requirements of it. I'm not sure at this point yet if and what I would present if I were part of it, but I definitely am willing to help with the organization. I think that's a Smolensk Conference is a very noble effort. The scientific content, the effort of various scientists for various fields trying to address a problem that has a severe and I would say even almost historically record limitations in terms of yes. Accessibility. Yes. I mean, this is from the scientific point of view. This is actually quite a privilege to be in a situation in which the scientific challenge is so great that even a normal obscure information is abstracted from the scientists. This is kind of like a real test of abilities and a real test of knowledge. It's a definitely a very desirable adventure to be a part of it, and not just adventure, but it's a noble thing to be, that I believe. I would resist any kind of political involvements. I don't join any kind of fractions. One day I'll probably find out the programs of the political parties. Knowing myself, I'll be unhappy with any of them. There'll be some good things, some bad things probably.
What I want to mention here, we are talking with now Professor Chris Cieszewski, who is also part of the international web of scientists. These people are sharing, investigating the case, using their expertise, their position, their knowledge, free. And I must emphasize, these people would charge for normal work hundreds of dollars per hour. There is nothing more grateful than the efforts of these people, and you know, it is just great. With Professor Chris Cieszewski in United States of America for Canadian-Polish Independent TV was talking Wacław Kujbida. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.